I'm so lucky to have you.
Thank you. So here's our flow of ideas that nutrition can underlie injury risk and overtraining. And since working with athletes and teams, 2002, I have yet to meet a single athlete whose overtraining wasn't caused by undernutrition. Because if you can't heal, then the main muscle groups that you're using in your sport fatigue before the rest of your muscles. So now you're not running the same, you're not cycling the same, you're not swimming the same. So let's say you're a runner, your glutes, hams, and quads run out of glucose and they're more damaged. And now you're running with your adductors and external rotators that are supposed to be stabilizers. And so you change the forces across your joint 10 minutes into your run or an hour into your run. And the forces changing across the joint is what tears the connective tissue. So systemic fatigue, where your whole body fatigues, will make you slow down, but does not necessarily change your biomechanics. The change in biomechanics comes from muscles fatiguing before others. And which muscles do you think are going to fatigue first if you don't refuel the muscles after your workout or eat enough to heal from your workouts? And so this nutrition ends up being, I'm going to show you here in a few minutes, that the research that is done on it shows that, at least based on the papers that are high enough quality to be considered in this systematic review, 83% of overtraining cases is not from training too hard. It's from undernutrition. That's a 2020 paper. So this is where the research stands, that we shouldn't be calling it overtraining anymore. It's a misnomer. It's an underhealing. It could be stress and low sleep, but most competitive athletes that feel overtrained, those aren't the dominant factors. It's that they don't understand refueling. They think peanut butter is a protein. You know, they try to go low carb to lose weight or low fat to lose weight. You know, so they push one thing too hard, either high or low, right? And this, so an imbalance. So we're going to talk about how this impacts gene expression, which is really the ground level driving force of healing. If you don't express genes, you can't make proteins. And if you don't eat, expressing genes can't be converted into proteins. And then we'll finish up with hydration. Okay, let's see if I can get, all right. So I've been powerlifting since I was 17. When I got into the Carl Vinson, I was in nuclear engineering for 6 years in the Navy. And the doctor tells me, well, you're obese. You've got 320 milligrams per deciliter cholesterol, which I knew was bad based on the expression on his face. I didn't know if 300 was bad or not, but I could tell something was up there. And your blood pressure is, you know, he says you're 1 foot in the grave at 20. So it's the first time in my life where I took that as data. What year is it? 89. Cool. And what you're going to see as we go through this material today, and then ultimately the handout to help you figure out your own nutrition, is that you can calculate stuff down to the calorie or the gram, but in the end, you just throw stuff on a plate, eat it, and move on, and hope you did it okay. Because the calculations, while they look like they're exact, are inherently wrong. And if your needs change, not just from day to day, but even moment to moment. Your hormone levels, I mean, if a cat jumps out and scares you, your adrenaline just skyrockets and your sugar use goes up. And 10 minutes later, more fats become available from the insulin. I mean, from the adrenaline. I mean, there's a fluctuation. There's no way to nail it. And are you going to measure out every gram and calculate the calorie? And then your needs are fluctuating constantly anyway. And then how fast the foods digest determine how well you match them. So even if you get the grams right, it's still not coming in at the right rate. I mean, just forget it. And that's why I like to use this concept that borrow it from the nuclear power plant, how we talked about our training, which everything had to be exact. But then when stuff happened, just had to get it done. Your training is like measuring everything with a micrometer, but once you measure it with a micrometer down to the calorie and the second on what you should do, you just mark it with chalk and put it with an X. So, and then you still have to gnaw on it to tweak it as you go. So I call that the Mica G, micrometer, chalk, axe, gnaw on it as you go. So the handout, you're going to calculate stuff down to the gram and the calorie, and you should know right up front it's wrong. It's wrong before you even start. The point is that you get in the ballpark to initiate your experimental process to figure out what's best for you under conditions that change from day to day. The mistake is to not do any calculations to give you a starting point to figure out how wrong that estimate is. Because then you're just going random, and when things don't go well, you don't know how to adjust what you did because you can't remember what you did. So the point isn't to get it right. The point is to think about what you're doing so that you can adjust it. That's all. So when you get the handout and you're calculating exact numbers, keep that in mind. That the point isn't to have a final number so that you can go home and start weighing stuff out. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. So low fuel in your muscles contributes significantly to both fatigue and changes in biomechanics that underlies sports injury risk in the last 25, 30% of a hard workout or competition. And for that, you need to refuel. The healing is more than just refueling. You need protein, you need micronutrients. So I think of this in 3 steps. First, how are your calories flowing into your body through your day? Second, are you drinking enough water, eating enough protein, carbohydrate to get your blood chemistry up so that your body doesn't eat itself as a meal? So I call that protecting lean tissue, PLT. And then the third step is for 1 or hopefully 2 meals at least each day to put in quality omega fats and vegetables so that you have the nourishment component. So separating this out, calorie flow, protecting lean tissue, nourishment. 1, 2, 3. And then there's kind of a 4th step. What do your meals look like, right? Like putting it together structurally so that it looks like a program. So here's some of the research from the last year, summarizing deranged biomechanics, lower limb, lower back, lower and upper limbs in sport from fatigue, which is almost always asymmetrical. It'll be one of the muscles in your legs fatiguing first, or it'll be your left leg faster than your right leg, and this will change your biomechanics. Again, if your fatigue was even because you're refueling and healing, then you'll have more systemic fatigue where everything's fatiguing at the same rate, which slows down your pace, but does not increase your injury risk nearly as much, unless you're losing mental focus and therefore, you're losing proprioception and, then injury risk will still go up. But once you have a main muscle fatiguing, you can be sharp as a tack and you still are going to struggle to maintain your biomechanics and your injury risk is going to skyrocket. And there goes your workouts. This happened to me and I ruptured a disc and I couldn't even jog for a year. So I've been there. I know what it's like to lose your quality of life because of losing your biomechanics in a single workout. In 1 second, your life has changed. So, I still power lift. I'm addicted to it, right? But I go with 300 instead of 600. Less than 3. I love to see the plates. It makes me happy. So this is I don't know. There's a lot of open access papers, and I don't know if this is an open access paper, but this is a great one to download and take a look at. It reviews all the literature up through 2020, showing that 83% of overtraining is from poor nutrition. And usually people that know a lot about nutrition and eat really healthy, tons of salads, they're not refueling. They think that there's enough protein in an avocado, right? It's not that they're not trying. They are trying and they're thinking. They're crunching numbers, they're meditating, they're sleeping, they're doing everything they can. And they're like, well, the avocado, that's kind of a meaty. I think that's a protein. And an apple, that's my carb. I just lost 1,000 calories in my workout. I'm gonna eat an apple, right? And this is, it isn't that they're not trying, and they're very health conscious. So this isn't like fast food result. This is from thoughtful people. And so this just graphs out performance and loss of body mass as you're training harder than what your needs are so that you have a low energy availability. So you're eating great, you're working out pretty hard, all of a sudden there's a competition coming, you work out harder, you're like, well, let's get a little leaner, we'll keep the nutrition the same. So your energy availability, relative energy availability drops because you're working out harder. And this is when your overreaching symptoms start to kick in. So there's overreaching is like a short-term overtraining, where you're going to be able to recover that within a few months, as opposed to in a year, you're still not recovering. And there's a term out there called functional overreaching, where you lose some performance for a week or two, but then when you back off on your training, you actually go to a higher level of performance because of having pushed too far. But if you never rebound with that extra benefit, then it's called a non-functional overreaching. But all that stuff happens within a month. Once it's overreaching, after 3 months, then it starts to transition into overtraining. You might have to take a whole year off, right? And that assumes that you don't have an acute injury, because that can then it can exceed beyond that. So this is from kind of a summary from that paper, just a few things I want to highlight. Most cases of overtraining come from underhealing, from undernutrition, particularly underfueling, carbohydrate, and depending on the sport, the athletic level, where the athlete is in their training cycle, this is 30 to 90% of athletes, depending on what sport you're in, your nutrition mindset, whether you're male versus female, right? All that goes into how prevalent it is. So for some athlete populations, it's 90% when they're in their peak season. So athletes are going into competitions overtrained, so to speak, because of undernutrition, a relatively high percentage of the time. And in all the studies that don't just look at calories, but carbohydrate, there's an average of half the amount of carbohydrate in the athletes that are experiencing overtraining symptoms. So it's a huge difference, right? There's athletes that they're fine with carbs and they just naturally do it right. And the ones that are overthinking it, they'll start to drop the carbs out, and all of a sudden they can't keep up with the rest of their team. So it's not that they're training too hard, because the rest of their team's fine. It's funny in a sad way how I remember a competitive runner coming to me saying, look, the rest of my team's leaner than me and they're gorging on carbs after our workouts, and I'm not. Why aren't I leaner? And what they didn't understand is that burning fat comes from having healthy tissue to burn it. Fat doesn't vaporize, it gets consumed, and it's healthy tissue that consumes it. And then also kind of funny is that you breathe your fat out as CO2. So if you ever wondered where the fat goes, you're breathing it out, contributing to greenhouse gases. So that's part of your footprint. There's so much going around about fasting and ketosis that I also want to highlight another finding in this review, that elite athletes that are trying to do ketosis in already under 24 hours, and some studies are 3-4 weeks long, are losing bone density. So your brain will eat up your muscle mass and even let your bone go away if you're pushing your carbs too low. Now, there are ways to do athletic ketosis, but you've got to already start your refuel of your muscle glycogen loss during the workout itself. Even if you're not wanting to empower the workout with fuel, you need to get glucose in there while insulin isn't driving it into your muscle, because muscle contraction triggers sugar uptake. So if you get the glucose in during the workout and in the 10 minutes after the workout, you will not go out of ketosis. And evidence proves that. You will not come out of ketosis. The hormonal response to hard training inhibits your coming out of ketosis. And then you go to low carb in your meals and you'll be fine. So it's not that you can't do ketosis. It's that you have to think about your health and do it right. That's all. These papers all show that when athletes bias their calories too much to half their day and not the other half, that they end up going down in testosterone, up in cortisol, losing their menstrual cycle, males having non-detectable testosterone levels. It just wrecks your body to even have 4 hours or more where you're too deep into the starved state. So this is why in my classes over the years, I started redefining for functionality, the difference between fasted and starved. Because fasted sounds good, so let's use it for the benefit. At what, how much can you cut calories in eating and benefit from that? We'll call that fasted, because fasted sounds like a good thing, so let's use it for a good thing. Starved sounds bad, so let's use that for where we're losing. I mean, too often we just use these terms for whether you perceive hunger or not, but physiologically, that's irrelevant. Who cares what you perceive? I mean, success isn't about just doing what you, oh, I'm thirsty, let me drink. Drink when you're thirsty. This is ridiculous. So you don't go to talks or read books or take classes for somebody to tell you what you already perceive and you already know. That's nuts. The only reason we have to learn things is to find out what we don't already know inherently. Adrenaline and cortisol is released in large amounts from waking up and from our workouts, and it suppresses hunger dramatically. And this is when we're most in the fasted state and most likely to have crossed over even deeper into the ditch, into the starved state. So we are the least likely to perceive hunger when the body is the most starved. We are the most likely to perceive hunger when we're just fasted but not starved yet. And this has nothing to do with perception. You will perceive starvation when you're only fasted, and you won't perceive any hunger at all when you're starved. You wake up with the body eating itself for breakfast. And it's irrelevant, it's completely irrelevant what you perceive and what you think. Your body's eating itself alive. So you protect your lean tissue. Even just a hard-boiled egg or a glass of soy milk, 50 calories of protein, 50 calories of like a plum, you're done. You just protected your lean tissue. You can call that breakfast if you want, but it's over in 30 seconds and you just protected your lean tissue. Who cares about breakfast? The harder you work out, the deeper in the ditch you are when you wake up. And so maybe you'll double or triple it and it starts to feel a little more like breakfast because you notice that you ate something. Because if you eat for a minute and you start to notice, oh wait, I'm eating. But when you keep it down to 20 or 30 seconds, you barely notice that. So all of a sudden out of this emerges this argument over how important breakfast is, and people saying you don't need to eat any, and wait, it should be the biggest meal of the day. And the reality is neither. It's a spectrum in between, starting with what do you want? Do you want to eat breakfast or not? Do you have time to eat breakfast or not? And if you don't, you just protect your lean tissue so that you don't eat yourself without realizing it. That's all. So this whole breakfast discussion, we can just erase it, delete, click, gone. Feels good to get rid of that, right? Yeah. Oh. What a relief. Yeah.
Random question, but several of us in here sometimes do this morning ride. I don't know how, I always want to know how many people eat breakfast.
Oh, you want to show of hands? Who eats breakfast?
I do. How many people?
How many people do not? How does it feel to eat yourself? How's it taste? Yeah.
You don't?
Okay.
It normally does, not before the 6.
After these 2 slides, you're never going to repeat that again. No, 2 more slides. I'm going to demolish your ability to even be accepting of that. You're just going to be like, wow, I need to move on from that. Well, the good news is you don't have to eat breakfast per se. I mean, when we hear breakfast, we think of a plate of food, right? But if you just grab something, shove it in, soy milk, you're done. That's it. That's all it takes. So here's a graphic from a paper, which I'll reference here a couple slides for now, that shows in red bars how many calories an athlete is burning up each hour through their 24-hour day. A little bit less per hour while they're sleeping, and then they wake up, and it's a little more. The big red drop, that's the calories of their workout. And this green line is the integrated sum of how deep in the ditch they're going in a deficit. And when it crosses below the yellow line, that's where the body starts to eat itself because it's too deep in the ditch. It doesn't have enough resources. And that's around when they wake up in the morning. They're just transitioning from fasted to starved when they wake up. So it's not like you got to rush to the kitchen. Unless you're training hard, then you'll be a little deeper from all the healing in the night. You'll go in the ditch faster from the healing, from training hard, right? So then you need to be able to get to the kitchen a little quicker. And the meals bumps the athlete up. So in their review of the literature, and there's a half dozen papers from different groups that show this, it's consistent, that when you're crossed over from fasted to starved for 4 or more hours a day, your body's not able to recover from that, no matter how healthy you eat later in the day, no matter how much you eat later in the day. This really ups the game. It makes us realize that it's not enough to eat enough calories, to eat enough protein, to drink enough water, that your body is alive every moment of your life, and it has needs every moment that you're alive, and that even 4 hours where it's eating itself cannot be compensated for any amount of healthy eating later. So that then tells you how much you have to eat. If your workout, when you wake up, is 4 hours long, you have to get enough out of the ditch that you don't get back into the ditch 4 hours later, because you don't want to be in the ditch, starved instead of fasted, more than 4 hours. Your body can tolerate 4 hours, but when you wake up, the clock is ticking. You have about 6 hours where you're fed after a meal, and another 6 hours where you're fasted, and it's helping you to not eat. But then you cross over into being starved. And a single hour of a hard workout does that transition instead of waiting for 12 hours. So that's where we have to start to think. How fast have I likely crossed over from being fasted into being starved? So if this athlete took some of the dinner calories and put them in breakfast, this is what the line would look like. The purple line. They're barely in the starved state ever. Even if they're restricting calories by 25% a day, so that they're always fasting. So an interesting new concept for you, perhaps, that when you undereat, you're fasted if you didn't eat enough. You're fed and fasted at the same time because you didn't eat enough, so your body is still consuming damaged proteins and things to get rid of. You're still getting this lysosomal cellular cleansing effect, where the cells eat the damaged stuff first. So as long as you're always under eating, you get that effect continuously. The point is not to eat enough so that, you know, it's all about healing, but rather that you eat enough to stop consuming yourself. You want the cells to consume the damaged material from under eating. You don't want them to consume healthy proteins that are driving the healing process. Am I making sense here? This isn't about, you know, overeat and heal. It's not like healing is 100% of the goal. But if you're not healing from undereating too much, because you could have 3,000 calorie dinner and the first half of your day not eat enough, you're losing so much lean tissue in the first half of your day, because usually we don't eat much for breakfast and then we do our hardest training. So you're crossing over from fasting to starve when you wake up, and then your workout pushes you deep into being starved. And what these studies show is that a single hour where you're more than 50% in the ditch, that you're not able to recover from that. So the first 6 hours, so here's you eating, your digestive system pours in the nutrients into the bloodstream, and then the spigot is the nutrients going to your lean tissue. If it comes in too fast, it goes to waste. So you can be under eating overall, but then have a big plate of pasta with a lot of overflow to body fat, and you're going to have 1/3 the power in your workouts, because once it's converted into fats, it doesn't go back to sugar. You burn it as fats. I've had a lot of high-level athletes say to me, well, I'm not trying to lose fat. That's not the point in their case. They're not trying to lose 5 pounds of fat to increase their power to weight ratio. They're just trying to heal, and they want more power, right? You want to run the marathon faster. You want to do the century ride faster. And the answer for that is to get the carbs that you're eating into your muscle tissue in the form of carbohydrate. You don't want an overflow into fat. So it has to come in at a rate that your lean tissue is willing to absorb it. The highest absorption rate is during and right after training, when there's barely any blood flow to your intestinal tract. So your blood sugar is dropping, but you have a limitation to how much you can get to your muscle. And that's about 1 gram of carbohydrate, 4 calories per minute. We'll come to that later. Come back to that. So here's my simplified version of that graph I just showed you. You're going through your 24-hour day. You're ticking down into a deficit each hour. So at the end of 24 hours, you're in a deficit by however many calories you need in 24 hours. For each person, that's a different number, right? It might be 1,200 calories, it might be 2,400 calories. When you get down to about 1/4 of your daily needs, which is after 1/4 of your 24-hour day, 6 hours, that's where you transition over into being starved. You spend more than 3 hours for females, 4 hours for males, that's where you get a statistically significant drop in hormone strength, immune system strength, menstrual cycle issues start to kick in, become significant. And if you're more than a 50% drop for even 1 hour, you could be working on your nutrition and meditation and sleep the rest of your day, and you will not fully heal. You will just, it's just a slippery slope going down. So for your hardest workout in the week, if you're not eating breakfast first, start putting some protein powder and some maltodextrin, glucose, into water, and don't just drink water. And it's not to have more power in the workout, it's to avoid this, so that you don't have a self-induced overtraining syndrome, symptoms that aren't even from training too hard. But what's typical is that we don't eat and then we work out. And then even with big healthy meals later, you're in the starved state all day, even when you're gorging on vegetables. You don't feel starved, but your body's falling apart anyway. Here's an example with strength trained males where they're doing intermittent fasting, intentionally not eating breakfast. And I underlined in green the benefits they're getting, and in red, the detriments. So not eating breakfast and training hard gives you benefits and hurts you at the same time. I put in dashed lines when it's not statistically significant. So their smallest muscles, their chest muscles from bench pressing, they're kind of able to heal, but their larger muscles, their back and legs are not. So those are in red. Their inflammation levels go down. Fasting insulin and cholesterol and triglyceride levels, they go down because the body's eating up the lipids in the bloodstream. But their stress hormones, cortisol, goes up. Thyroid goes down, insulin-like growth factor, testosterone drops like a rock. Their largest muscles aren't recovering. So you can cherry pick papers all day long showing that intermittent fasting is amazing and we should all do this. Or you can use athletes as their own internal controls and show that they're benefiting and falling apart at the same time. So what's the answer? Do some caloric restriction continuously, as much as 25%, and minimize how much your body crosses over from the fasted to the starved state. So you crunch the numbers, you measure it with a micrometer, mark it with chalk and cut it with an axe and move on, gnaw on it. That's it. There's no right answer. There's just living and paying attention to stuff other than, oh, I'm thirsty, let's drink now. Or, oh, I'm finally hungry at 2 p.m, maybe I should eat something. I mean, that's not gonna work. If you're serious about your sport, you're gonna think. You're not just gonna react. So here's the only large prospective study on intermittent fasting done to date. And it wasn't for weight loss. It was just to see, do people stay healthy or not? Came out of UCSF in September, and it showed that 2/3 of their weight loss was muscle. Double of what research for weight loss usually shows. Usually it's only 1/3 muscle. Or if you do it right, only 1/4 or less. And if you include some strength training, that minimizes that quarter loss, and so you don't have to lose any muscle. There's ways to do it. Weight loss works when you think. But to just have a light switch, well, let's eat, let's not eat, your body's gonna eat itself then. And you are whittling away your ability to maintain that weight loss with the loss of muscle mass. So the way to do this is take a back of an envelope or a yellow stick or a scratch piece of paper. You make your X and Y axis. You bring your line down. Here's some meals. Here's my workout. You can connect the dots to get a sense of where you are, and then you just try it. Doesn't work, you get another yellow stick a few days later. And the losses in the workout that you want to recover are your sugar losses. You don't need to replace the fats. And if you're doing a cardio workout where there's not much intensity variation, you're losing less glucose, half or more might be fat loss. You don't need to choke down avocados and nuts to recover the fat loss. What you need is to eat a piece of garbage, a piece of bread or some pretzels or whatever to replace the glucose loss. The fat loss, we're going to leave that as a loss. That's good. Let that go. We're just going to think about the glucose loss. This downward ticking line with your meals, that includes fats and protein and everything. But when it comes to the losses in the workout itself, we're going to focus on the glucose loss because that's what's going to dictate to us what we have to eat afterwards. Some of your workouts, you might only lose 100 calories of glucose. It's a shakeout run, a recovery ride. So you don't want to refuel at all. It's fine. 100 calories of glucose loss is fine. You just have your protein, some water. You're done. As soon as you're losing 200, 300 or more, the refuel becomes critical. You can't just have protein and water. So get a little sciencey on you for a second. If you don't like this, just look away. So the transcription factors, or the molecules that drive gene expression for healing, are the mechanistic target of rapamycin. For increased fat burning is the AMPK, so adenosine monophosphate kinase. ATP, who's heard of ATP? Adenosine triphosphate, ATP. So that will burn into ADP, which can then burn into adenosine monophosphate. Going from ATP to ADP, you can regenerate that with creatine phosphate, burning fats, burning sugars. But once the ADP goes to AMP, adenosine monophosphate, that's garbage. So that's what your muscle fibers and your neurons use as a fuel gauge. So if you burn ATP into ADP, and then you just slow down for a minute, the ATP all comes back. So it's a false low. The fuel's actually still there. Just looks bad for a minute, but it'll come back. But when you're driving hard so that the ADP goes to adenosine monophosphate, that's lost. That gets broken down and the ATP has to be rebuilt from scratch. So the muscles use that as a true fuel gauge. Like if on your car, the fuel gauge, it dropped down, but then it came back, you're like, okay, it's a false negative. I just had to slow down, it came back. But if it goes down and stays down, that's true fuel loss. That's AMP. And that's why adenosine monophosphate kinase is used by your muscles to gauge, we can't keep up. So we need to change gene expression so that we can burn more fats. So that's what the muscles use as an absolute true fuel gauge. The mechanistic target of rapamycin detects the tension on your muscle by responding to the rippling of the membranes during forceful contraction. So the greater the resistance and the faster the contraction, the greater the rippling of the membranes, which triggers it. So sprints will trigger it. And that generates, drives healing response, more than growth hormone and testosterone put together. When you don't fuel much, you are screen sharing. That's fine. Let's see. Can I get rid of that? I'm not able to. How can I?
Subtract 3 on that, right? Let me see it.
When you don't refuel your workouts, this molecule that triggers increased fat burning, adenosine monophosphate kinase, is maximally activated. And it shuts down the main driver for healing. So when you don't refuel, it is true that it generates a fat burning response because it maximally triggers this sensor that fuel is low. So it increases fat burning response dramatically, but it inhibits healing. If maximizing fat burning keeps you from healing, you're going to go up in body fat because of the loss of your fat burning capacity. So here's how much carbs that American College of Sports Medicine, International Society for Sports Nutrition, and the International Committee says we should eat. There's some consistency here, which is a good thing, right? They're reviewing the same literature. Hopefully they come up with some similar numbers. Although the IOC tends to focus on younger athletes that are actually going to the Olympics, whereas the ISSN and ACSM, that includes 60, 80-year-old, 90-year-old athletes, right? I mean, they're including, so that will change the numbers a little bit. So daily needs, anywhere from 500 to 3,000 calories of carbohydrate a day. They're giving it in terms of grams per kilogram per day. With carb loading, doubling your carbs for a day or two on average. Before exercise, 1 or 2 grams per kilogram body weight. So there's a few hundred calories. So that they're basically suggesting breakfast, which I'm saying you don't actually have to do. Just protect your lean tissue if you can't do that. During exercise, up to 1 gram per minute. It's 4 calories per minute. That's as much as you can get from your intestinal tract into your bloodstream. There's not enough blood flow during hard workouts. You can burn 4 times that per minute, but you can only get that amount in. So fatigue is inevitable during high intensity exercise. There's no way to. And then after exercise, up to 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight within 30 minutes, within 20 minutes, within an hour, right? There's all kinds of different. But the rate of uptake into muscle of glucose falls down with a half time of 20 minutes. So 20 minutes after you end your workout, muscle is only absorbing glucose at half the rate. So saying that you could do it an hour later, to me, is a little bit misleading. I mean, technically, sure, you can carb up in the middle of the night if you want, but is that the best time? I would say as soon as the blood flow is coming back to the intestinal tract, which is in 5-10 minute time frame, you want that glucose coming in. And if you're nauseous and can't handle food, go with a supplement, go with maltodextrin. There's pharmaceutical grade organic maltodextrin made from corn, so there's no gluten. You know, there's ways to do it. I'm not a supplement person, but if you're nauseous and you're trying to stay healthy in the face of hard training, you have to start considering supplements during those time periods of nausea where you need to get stuff to your muscle, where you're in your deepest pit. Because healthy eating later will not compensate for that loss. I showed you that earlier. Here's a study with the Stanford cycling team where the blood sugar rise for the same amount of carbs in the 2 groups. It's twice as high with cornflakes than all bran. There's no meal on the bottom because the cornflakes digest twice as fast. It's coming in too fast. And their insulin response is double as high, so high that it's sending carbohydrate to fat. Muscle has a limit to how fast it can absorb it. Cornflakes is great right after training because it comes in very fast. But before training, this is before training, where you can see how their insulin level plummets as time 0 is the start of their 2-hour workout. And because of this massive insulin response from the same amount of carb, but it came in too fast. So it's responding as if you ate 4 times as much carbohydrate just because it came in faster, even though you didn't eat more. It was too processed, right? Then that insulin isn't just getting it to go into muscle, it's also sending some of it to fat. If it comes in slower, the insulin response is less and muscle and the brain will take more, fat gets less. So this is where, ultimately you get to pre-diabetes. In my work with a pro soccer team, with the earthquakes for 2 years before the new team came in with their staff, there was 2 athletes who looked like they were pre-diabetic. They weren't healing enough to even absorb carbohydrates and they weren't refueling. So here they are having pre-diabetes symptoms as a pro athlete at the top of their game, experiencing overtraining symptoms because they're not getting enough carb in. It was the lack of carbs pushing them towards pre-diabetes as a pro athlete. And the 5 team doctors didn't know what to make of that until I told them what I just said to you. And they're like, oh, that's right. Tissue that's not healed is like tissue not at all. It's like they just lost half their leg muscles because they're not healing. Because instead of having their refuel, they're going on foam roller, ice bath, talking to the coach, showering, slapping backs of their buddies. 2 hours later, they finally eat. You can't do that. Not when you're training that hard. So the rate of fat burning, so when insulin pushes carbs that came in too fast into fats because the carbs came in too fast, so insulin goes higher than it should, and therefore pushes more into fats because there's more insulin to do that. And the fat cell's response is to think there's a bunch of blood sugar out there, so it stops releasing fats. That's not good for your workout. So you end up burning half as much fat. This is measured every 20 minutes through their workout because of the high insulin response. The last thing that you want to do in your workout is drop your blood sugar from insulin clearing it into fat and drop your blood fat levels that you need for your endurance because the insulin told the fat cells there's so much sugar out here, we don't need the fats anymore. So you end up with a low blood sugar and a low fat level at the same time. Those are your only 2 fuel sources. So now your muscle only has whatever it has stored inside. And muscle doesn't store fat very much. That's fat cells' job, not muscle's job. But fat cells aren't releasing it anymore because you had cornflakes. But then after the workout, you should have the cornflakes. You don't want to eat healthy after your workout. You want to get the glucose in fast. That's what's going to keep you sane so that you can sleep, your mood doesn't change, you don't derange your immune and endocrine system. So their power at the end of their workout drops like rock. It's as if they ate nothing. Eating cornflakes is like having eaten nothing. I call this anti-eating. When your hormonal response to processed food drops your blood chemistry to as bad or worse than if you had not eaten at all. You're better off just not eating if you're going to do that. Like donuts and bagels, gorging on processed carbs right before a workout, you might as well just not eat them. But the bagel's what you need after the hard workout, right? So all of a sudden what was wrong before becomes the right thing. So if you like bagels and muffins, load up, work out every day. I've had people start working out every day just to have the bagels and muffins. They're like, oh, okay, so if I did, yeah. Yeah. Just limit it to 1 gram per minute. That's probably one little crispy thing.
We have a professional cyclist training. She'll just eat flip-flops for 6-hour bike ride.
Yeah. And there are some fancy products out there like that turn into gels in your stomach. So there's a lump that slowly breaks down. I mean, there's different ways of doing it. Some people are more sensitive and benefit more from the trickle flow than others. And so you just have to find out how important is it. Can you just have a small bottle where you take a shot every 15 minutes separate from a larger water bottle? Or do you respond better when it's coming in slow, in which case you have to put it into the water bottle so that it's trickling in every minute instead of every 15, right? This is what you find out. One time I was talking to a US Olympic marathoner who asked me the question, when's the best time to slam a goo pack? Because he would start a race with one and then just slam the whole thing. And he ended up walking, getting like dizzy, cramping from a goo pack, 100 calories. And what I told him is, well, you know, you're doing marathons in 2 hours and 12 minutes. So you're, or faster, depending on, so you're not going to be drinking much water, right? You're not going to have much transport capacity. The goo is going to pull water from your bloodstream into your intestinal tract before it brings the goo back in. And you're already severely dehydrated 90 minutes in. So you have to pace it. Maybe, you know, be willing to put some water in when you take half a pack and then wait. Or alternatively, just don't do it at all. And his previous race, he ended up walking at the end because of the cramping being so intense. So you have to think about the big picture. Can I transport it in, or am I going to get stomach cramps? Or is it a slow activity where it's going to come in too fast and could put me to sleep? Because that happened to a triathlete that I was working with. They were doing a 14-hour event, and they ended up with 2 bars and a goo pack, and they're like falling asleep the way we do after, you know, 2 desserts at lunch, where you're looking at the clock every 5 minutes at the desk, like, when's the day going to end? I like my job, but I can't stay awake, right? And that happened to her on the bike. So you go from a high blood sugar to both a low blood sugar and low fat availability. So now your body has to eat itself during your workout. That's not going to pan out for a good numbers on your time, or even how you feel. You're not going to enjoy your workouts very much either. So what about meals? So here's normal controls, here's diabetics. The red is the fast carbs coming in, like the cornflakes, but in this case, bread and rice. And the green shows how much slower it comes in when it's eaten with vegetables. So you cut in half how fast carbs come into your bloodstream when you eat the carbs with vegetables, because they're both in your stomach at the same time. The stomach's not able to separate them. So if it takes 2 or 3 hours for the stomach to break down the vegetables, the carbs stay trapped in there, and it's like a magic trick. Now you can eat pizza again. So you don't just have to put pizza in the 10 minutes right after your workout. You can actually go out with your friends again, unless they don't serve salad there. Then you cannot. Then you have to eat the salad before you go. So carb loading, you double your carbs in a day, and you've maxed out your glycogen. 2 more days of carb loading does nothing because you've maxed out. It just goes to fat. Or you can go up in your carbs by 50% for 2 days. So that's your carb loading protocol. You'll get less fat gain out of it and spend less time asleep at your desk, at your job, if you do a 50% increase in carb for 2 days, because it doesn't come in as fast as if you double your carbs in 1 day. Just think how much vegetables you'd have to eat to slow down double the carb load to try, right? That's a lot of vegetables. And then you end up with massive diarrhea during your race 2 days later, right? So you have to have a heart, some compassion for your future self in the race by doing the carb load over 2 days so that you can have 6 small meals and actually reduce your vegetables. Because if you're normally doing 3-4 meals a day, or 3, let's call it feedings, right? 3-4 feedings a day, they might all be small, there might be one bigger, let's just call them feedings. If you double the number of feedings and go up in carbs 50%, even though you're going up in carbs, it's still going to be coming in slower because you've increased the number of feedings that you're spreading it out through. So you can go up in carb and down in vegetables without hurting yourself by increasing the number of feedings. So that's how you do your carb load without getting massive cramping and diarrhea during your competition. There's ways to do almost everything. You just think, that's all. There is no right way. What's right is what works for you personally. This graph this is a summary of the research on getting carbs into your body during workouts. Basically, you plateau at about 1 gram per minute. Whether you're taking in 2 or 3 or 4 grams per minute, you still only get 1 gram per minute into your muscle. So that gives us an upper limit of how much we can get in during training. This is the study in the red box, where they show that whether you're taking in closer to 1 gram per minute or 2 grams per minute, you still only get about 1 gram per minute into your muscle. Doubling how much you eat during your training doesn't help. But if you include a little bit of fructose, then you'll get a little more in there. But fructose by itself doesn't do a whole lot, because the fructose isn't burned very much as a fuel. It has to go to the liver to be converted into glucose and then re-released into the bloodstream, and that takes time. But you can push more than a gram per minute if you include a little bit of fructose. So if you want to get more fuel into your muscle, you'd put some table sugar to the maltodextrin. That way you get a little bit of fructose added. If you're doing a long event that has a high intensity where you're worried about that last couple hours, you can push the limits a little bit with that. And what this tells us is that since fructose has separate transporters, it can add a calorie per minute to the 4 calories per minute of glucose that's absorbed, for a total of 5 to muscle. So we're more limited in intestinal absorption of the bloodstream than we are sugar uptake in the muscle. That's the conclusion. So stay hydrated. Otherwise, calories can hurt you a lot. You'll get the intestinal cramping instead. During intensive muscle contraction, the fat globules, liposomes that have the sugar transporters, come to the surface of the muscle to absorb the sugar, and then over 20 minutes, they go away. Or half of them are gone in 20 minutes, roughly. At 40 minutes, half of those. At 60 minutes, half of those. So you're down to 1/8 of the fueling rate. So getting fuel in the first 10 minutes for your hardest workouts is important. You'll have some intermediate workouts where you can have less carbs and maybe wait 20 minutes, then some shakeout runs, shakeout rides, recovery stuff where you don't refuel at all. Unless you're transitioning to starvation from fasted because you just woke up, and then you do a shakeout run or recovery ride, then you need to really get on the refuel because you're already into starvation because of a light workout, because you woke up, didn't eat anything, went straight to, and that's fine, as long as you know to get to the refuel, not so much because of the workout, that wasn't very much, but you started out low because you woke up and didn't eat anything and then did that. You can do that. But one time I worked with a competitive runner or cyclist whose recovery ride was 90 minutes of hard work. To her, that just didn't count because the other workouts were so much harder. So when I did a follow-up session with her, she's like, I'm still falling asleep and I'm not sleeping well. And, okay, well, let's break down the workouts in more detail. And I finally asked her, well, describe the recovery ride. And what I'm hearing is like an intermediate level workout. You need to start refueling that within the first 30 minutes because you're going 90 minutes. So You want to call that a recovery ride, that's okay, but we can't treat it what most people would call a recovery ride. If you don't refuel your main muscles within 10 minutes, you're going to get more fat burning, but it's going to deactivate this main molecule that drives healing. And it's going to change your biomechanics. So it's not just going to reduce your performance, it's going to increase your injury risk. So here's a paper that kind of summarizes this effect. This is the inside of your muscle. There's some fat globules for fuel. There's your glycogen, that's your sugar supply. Adenosine monophosphate kinase is our sensor for how low in fuel we are. It's trapped in glycogen. That's where the sensor is. So as you lose your fuel, it frees up adenosine monophosphate kinase. That's how your DNA knows that you lost your fuel, because the sensor is trapped in the fuel itself. So as you lose the fuel, it's freed and goes to your DNA and says, we need to burn more fats because we can't burn sugars enough. We're freaking out, start burning sugars. So it's that fuel loss that frees it up, that tells your DNA, increase the machinery that absorbs and burns fat. So everything that you've heard about low carb increasing fat burning is true. But usually they don't finish the other half of the sentence, that you demolish your ability to heal if that's the only thing you're thinking about. You might have 6 workouts a week where 2 of them you barely need to refuel and will benefit from that. 2 of them, you need like a moderate level of refueling. And the 2 hardest ones, you need to refuel like your life depends on it, because it kind of does. This is a review paper by Keith Barr at UC Davis, one of the original discoverers of the molecule that drives healing, mTOR. And he summarizes it this way. Our workouts generate tension that trigger this molecule that drives protein production. But we need protein to come in, otherwise that shuts it down. And if we don't refuel, that will shut it down. Which is saying, to me, something amazing, that your muscles detect when sugars and protein is available and doesn't even allow DNA gene expression to start if they're not. Your muscles are way smarter than you thought. You might have assumed that your muscles try to heal, but when the resources aren't there, it's looking for them. It doesn't even start. When the resources aren't there, gene expression does not initiate. The mechanistic target of rapamycin and its complex drives gene expression for protein production only when it gets a signal that you've worked out, that you've eaten protein, and that you've refueled. If you don't refuel, adenosine monophosphate kinase, AMPK, shuts that signal down so that this is not activated, and you're going to urinate out your protein. Refueling your workouts allows you to use protein for the next 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, you're just enriching the toilet. So here are our governing body's recommendation of protein intake. For daily needs, 1 to 2 grams per kilogram. And if you want to lose body fat, the International Olympic Committee suggests still, having a couple grams per kilogram, so you can bump up the protein a little, but maintain your carb intake greater than 0. Before and during exercise, most of these organizations don't have a recommendation. The research they don't feel is clear enough. The International Society for Sports Nutrition is suggesting that you have at a minimum 1/4 the amount of protein as however much carb you're eating. So they're thinking of it as a ratio in addition to a gram target. And then after exercise, 25 grams, 20 grams. But really, the best review of the literature tells us that the protein target right after a workout is based on how many kilograms of body weight you have that did the workout. That's 0.3 grams per kilogram. So for some people, that'll be 10 grams of protein, for somebody else, 30. So that's, of course, those are average results from other people, right? And so protein, the production rate of protein in muscle plateaus out at about 0.3 grams per kilogram coming in. Doubling or tripling that doesn't drive protein production any more than that. And the window for absorbing protein doesn't shut. Refuel shuts by half in 20 minutes. Protein absorption rate is just as high 90 minutes later. So while getting protein is important, it's not as urgent. For simplicity, it's probably better to combine it all. You have some water, you have your refuel and your protein. But the protein should stay about the same after every workout. It's the carb that fluctuates from 0 to a Noah's bagel, that's 400 calories for the hardest workouts, right? It's the carbs that fluctuate. The protein really should be consistent. So here's a study looking at New York City police officers during strength training and dieting over 3 months. And they show that when they add protein smoothies to their day in addition to the meals, that the faster digesting, so the whey protein is faster digesting, the casein, these are the two proteins in milk, casein digests slower. The casein, the protein that's mainly in cheese, you know how in yogurt you end up with water the next day after you take a scoop out? That's the whey protein. It's water soluble. The casein clumps into cheese. So when it clumps in your stomach, it turns into cottage cheese, there's a nice thought, and it keeps it from emptying from the stomach. So it comes into the blood much slower, and you get more muscle mass. Even though the amino acid ratio isn't as good as the whey protein, you end up with twice as much muscle building and therefore twice as much fat loss and significantly more strength gain in these lifts, just because you have a slower digesting protein, even when that protein isn't as well matched to the amino acids you need in your muscle. So it's not just the quality of the protein. You want it to come in slow. So I'm kind of supporting the idea of eating food here as opposed to supplements. Because a protein bar, protein powders, protein smoothies, in 90 minutes, most of them are done. They're gone. Unless you go with casein. Well, why not go with fish or tofu, right? What's wrong with that? It's the slowness of the rate that gives you hours of availability. That's what your cells care about, not getting overloaded and then nothing. It's not the gram count, unless you're thinking grams per minute. But that's not how we usually think. We're like, well, I'm gonna have 4 chicken breasts because I didn't eat all day, and that meets my grams. That doesn't mean anything. That just enriches your urine. Good job. So the protein that you eat is digested into amino acids which are absorbed into your cells, and they're reconverted into protein by machinery that uses fuel. When you need more of that because you're working out hard, so you need faster healing, fats driving that process is too slow. You need a stable blood sugar. That's why hospital patients can heal as much as 3 times faster when there's glucose in their IV drip, because fat availability does not maximize protein production. It's your blood sugar that does that. And that doesn't mean start gorging on bagels while you're watching TV or bags of popcorn. I'm talking about your blood sugar, which can be lower from popcorn and bagels, from the anti-eating effect. What we're after is blood sugar availability, not gobbling down stuff. You have to look at what's in your hand about to go in and think about the rate of entry into your bloodstream. If you're not eating enough carbs, you'll urinate out more of your protein. If you're eating too much, it's converted into fats as if you didn't eat it, except that you're fatter now. Good job again. So how foods work together has a dramatic impact on your body's ability to use it. Vegetables slow down carb digestion way more than fats and protein does. Fats and protein slow down digestion 15 minutes later. They generate a hormonal response, hormone called CCK, cholecystokinin. It takes 15 minutes for that to happen. So are you going to eat your protein and fats and then 15 minutes later come in and eat some carbs? And even 15 minutes later, it doesn't slow it down as much as vegetables. And vegetables, you don't have to wait. If you have a salad and a burger with the bun, not a lettuce wrap, the salad will slow down the bun so that the bun helps you. Without the salad, the bun hurts you. So the burger can be good for you, it can be bad for you based on whether you slow it down or not. You are the one that decide what to do with the burger. Because if you're training hard, you need the bun. The right choice is to go with the bun and slow it down, as opposed to, no, let's get rid of the bun so that I can't heal. So that I go up in body fat in a way that makes no sense to me, which is because you're undercutting it by not healing. Recovery meals are not just about water, protein, and carbs. We need nourishment. So that ups the game. At least once, hopefully twice a day, even nutrient delivery of omega fats and quality vegetables without pesticides. Pesticides hurt your mitochondria, which is your fat burning machine. That AMPK thing that drives fat burning triggers gene expression to increase your mitochondria, your fat burning machinery. Pesticides destroys that. So you can be slowing down digestion so that you have less insulin and burn more fats, but the pesticides destroy the mitochondria that burn the fats, so you lose the benefit of the vegetables. We don't want to eat vegetables that destroys the benefit of the vegetables. Right? I mean, if you're going to choke that stuff down, get the benefit, right? Because if anything, it tastes better when it's organic, probably, not worse. So quality omega fats and vegetables oxidize quick. So powders aren't going to work, and it's the coarseness of the vegetable that slows down digestion. If you blend it, it empties from the stomach within 10 minutes. If you chew it 100 times, it empties from the stomach in 2 hours. If you chew it 25 times, it empties in 3 to 4. That's what you want. So you can do two things, one of two things. Either count how many chews and keep it to 25, or don't count at all, because that's how many times people chew without thinking. Don't overthink it. Just eat natural food, and it works. It's optimized. What we do without thinking is optimized. Unless we wait to drink when we're thirsty and wait to eat when we're hungry. That doesn't optimize anything. Okay. And when it comes to protecting lean tissue, it's not just how many grams, it's the rate that it comes in. So with an athlete, you want your quality omegas and vegetables, you have to add some refuel, and you have to add some healing protein. And that refuel is what shuts the muscle up so it doesn't keep your blood sugar chronically low. If you don't refuel, it shuts down the healing in muscle, and muscle keeps chronically sucking in blood sugar, so now you can't even sleep because the blood sugar is too low to get into deep sleep. So it becomes a vicious cycle. If you're going to drop carbs in your meals to get leaner and to have a fasting effect, that's fine. But then the refuel becomes that much more important. As long as you get that refuel into your muscle, it's not going to keep your blood sugar chronically low with low carb meals. Now, the more you need to heal, the more carbs you need in meals to match the extra protein. But a 1-to-1 ratio is enough. 1 to 1 gram of protein to carbs is enough. You'll basically be matching what hospital patients get to optimize their healing. It's the same thing. And that's not a lot of carbs. Most athletes have more carbs. Most athletes that are willing to eat carbs, that aren't trying to do this ketosis thing, they have more carbs than protein. You actually don't need that. When you refuel, you only need the amount of carbs as protein. So when you hear somebody say, well, you don't need that much carbs, they're right. And if you hear somebody else say, well, you need way more carbs, guess they're right too. Are you refueling or not? That determines how hard you have to push the carbs in your meals. The less you refuel, the more you need in your meals, the fatter you're going to get refueling. You will be fatter if you use your meals to refuel. The carbs in your meals should be for healing, to match your protein, to accelerate the protein production. It should not be to refuel your muscles. It should be to fuel recovery, not to refuel the workout itself. Am I making sense? However, since the absorption rate of glucose into muscle right after even your hardest workouts is limited to 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight, if you're 100 kilograms like me, that's 100 grams, that's 400 calories. What if you lost 1,000 calories doing a 5-hour thing? But you can only get 400 in. Now you have to add some refuel to your next meal. But make that meal an hour later, not 6 hours later. And if you need more than an immediate refuel and a refuel in your next meal, put carbs into the workout. Do not put yourself in a position where you're still refueling 2 meals later. You will be a fatter athlete. You will. You have one of two choices. Either don't refuel enough and lose your healing, or do refuel enough and get fatter because you have to put them in too many of your meals too far out. The refuel enables you to be a lean, healthy athlete. It's the refuel that allows you to do that. A little bit of the details on protein. 10% of all food you eat, including peanut butter and avocado, is protein. So when you have a 500 calorie meal, 50 calories or even 75 calories is protein that you can actually use in your body. If you look at a nutrition label for, not that avocados have that, or nuts, but you can look it up. It's twice as much protein as I'm telling you, but the amino acid ratio is off. So the 10 to 15% number is how much you can actually use. So when you're eating a regular sized meal, a filling, balanced, unprocessed meal that digests slow, you're getting enough protein for somebody who's just doing some exercise but isn't trying to be competitive. As soon as you become competitive and you're training hard, or you're in the on season, you have a competition coming up, you'll need 2 to 3 times as much protein. To get that without adding a protein concentrated food, you'd have to eat 1,500 calories per meal. So this is where eggs and tofu and steak and fish start coming in. Another time where you have to start thinking about these concentrated proteins is when you don't want to eat at all. If you want to wake up, not eat, and train, well, now there's 0 calories. So you use a hard-boiled egg or some soy milk. So you use concentrated protein sources when you either don't want to eat or you are eating, but you're training so hard that what comes in naturally in food isn't enough to keep up with the training. Am I making sense here? So you're talking to a sedentary person and they eat pretty healthy. They don't need any eggs. They don't need any fish. They don't need any shrimp. You crunch the numbers, they're getting enough protein as long as they're eating enough calories. As soon as you restrict calories, you have to add an egg, piece of fish, a shrimp and a half, whatever the numbers tell you, right? Which is wrong. Micrometer, chalk and the axe. So I put these in order with vegan in red of most concentrated to least concentrated. These are the efficient ways of upping your protein so that you don't have to double your caloric intake. Or getting some protein in at a time where you don't really want to eat so that you don't have to eat. So the ACSM, International Society of Sports Nutrition, International Olympic Committee recommend around 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And basically 2 to 3 times what you would need if you didn't work out at all, which is 0.8 grams per kilogram if you don't work out at all. And carbs from these same organizations, recommending 3 to 6 times as much carb as protein, half of that being for the refuel, the other half to accelerate the protein use. But you could have workouts on any given day that use up 3,000 calories of carbs, right? I mean, it depends if it's an all-day effort. Oh, this is actually the same chart, so we don't need that. And so take your baseline times 2 to 3, that's your protein need. Your carb needs are 60 grams for your brain and a 1-to-1 match of protein for healing. If you're trying to fat adapt, that's still going to leave you with a low blood sugar. Performance will go down and health will go down. So the research is clear on that. There's a lot of athletes that are touting this, go ketosis, just eat fats, but the workouts without refueling will inhibit your ability to stay healthy with that. And long-term performance is based on health. So for recovery meals, you don't just protect lean tissue with carb and protein, you bring in the idea of omega fats and carbohydrates, and that's thinking. So that's where the handout comes in. So I'm not going to leave this slide up because you're going to look at it on your handout. And we can, there's not enough room on the handout to actually fill in meals, but we're going to hand out blank sheets of paper later so that I can show you how easy it is to create your program. So we'll come back to that. If you were to only have 1 meal in the day, you would still have to refuel your workout. And that 1 meal should be earlier in your day because you wake up transitioning from fasted to starved and don't want to stay in the starved state. So the 1 meal a day would have to be earlier, not late. If you have 2 meals a day, then it doesn't have to be as slower digesting. Slow digesting would be raw vegetables and beans with chia seeds, right? That's what you get. That's your 1 meal. Has to take 12 hours to digest. So you just go with coarse stuff that you could barely chew. You go with 2 meals, it starts to look more like regular eating, but still slow digesting. So you don't get any cake there. If you do 3 meals or more, now some of those feedings can be a little less healthy than others. particularly where your metabolism is higher, like the meal after your workout, right? And if you're grazing, eating every 2 or 3 hours, then every other one would have a protein matched 1-to-1 with a carb. And every other feeding wouldn't need to protect lean tissue because you're doing it with every other one. So the ones in between can be whatever you want, an apple, celery sticks with peanut butter, right? You don't have to worry about it. So the more frequently you eat, it isn't that you have to think less, it's just that you have a little more flexibility. The fewer times that you eat, the more you have to think about slowing down digestion to minimize the time that you're in the starved state. Water. So the governing bodies, same ones that I keep bringing up. So before exercise, it's either recommend to drink some water or no recommendation. The research isn't giving us numbers. During exercise, avoid losing over 2% your body weight. That's where the muscle cramping, and if you're consuming calories, intestinal cramping will start to kick in. For most people, this is 0.5 to 2 liters per hour. If it's hard work in the heat, it can go even higher. And after exercise, replace losses. ACSM thinks you replace a little more than your losses. If you don't ever measure your weight change across a workout, you'll not have any idea how much you're losing. You weigh yourself before and after a workout. The difference there every 2.2 pounds is a liter of loss. If you drank a liter, then that would have been a 2.2 pound loss, right? So if you drank a liter and still lost 2 pounds, that's a total of 2 liters lost. And you replace 50%. So should we include electrolytes or not? Well, it depends on how much you're replacing of your water. So here's the bloodstream, sodium chloride. Here's inside muscle, potassium, magnesium, calcium. You lose a little potassium and salt in your sweat, but mainly it's sodium chloride. On the next slide, I'm going to show you by the font size how much relatively you're losing. Table salt, sodium chloride versus potassium, calcium, magnesium. If supplementing with that tiny magnesium that you can barely read reduces your cramping, it's because you don't eat enough vegetables. Magnesium is the metal center of chlorophyll, what makes plants green. You're not eating anything green if magnesium supplements take away cramping, because you barely lose any. If low magnesium is causing you to cramp, you're not eating healthy. So if magnesium supplementation helps you, this is a red flag that you need to overhaul your eating and start thinking of vegetables as central to your foods as opposed to optional. Athletes who get helped by magnesium, when I tell them you don't eat vegetables, they're always surprised how you know that. So supplements are powerfully useful in red flagging that you're not eating right, and are horribly useful in helping you beyond healthy eating. Unfortunately. I wish it wasn't the case. We could just do it with supplements, right? I mean, I guess make it easier in a very expensive, deranged kind of way. But anyway, so sodium chloride is mostly what you lose. In every liter of sweat, you lose a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. The liter of body fluid that created the sweat had a teaspoon of salt in it. So when the liter comes out as sweat, it leaves 3/4 teaspoon behind that your body doesn't want. Salt concentrates in your body as you sweat. You might not have realized that because your helmet gets crusted over and all this. You're like, you probably wouldn't have thought that the concentration of salt in your body was going up higher as your body is crusting out on the outside, right? But it is, and that's what causes cramping, is the increased concentration of salt. So if you replace 3/4 of the liter lost, you return the salt concentration in your body back to normal. That's what you want. So if you're replacing less than 3/4 of your water loss, you shouldn't use much electrolytes during the training. If you're replacing less than half of your water loss, you have to exclude electrolyte replacement. You will cause cramping because of the electrolyte supplements. Only if you're replacing 3/4 of your losses should you consider it. And only if you're replacing all of your losses during an event should you replace all of your salt loss. So how do you know how much you're losing? You get on a scale before and after a hard workout that matches kind of what a competition would be, so that you can gauge how much salt should I include with my fluids each hour. So a liter per 1,000 calories that you eat to process your food. So you need the water to come in as, an even flow through the day because you're digesting food through the day. If you're only eating once a day, it's a really slow digesting meal, and you still need water through the day to process it because you're choosing foods where the one meal helps you. If you're doing grazing instead of one meal, then you need the water evened out anyway. It doesn't matter either way. During training, 1/2 liter to 2 liters, maybe even more if it's hot. for most athletes, their hardest workouts, they're not going to replace over half their fluid losses. So you don't want the salt till after the workout's over. And if you don't replace it after the workout's over, you'll never be able to fully rehydrate. You'll drink 3 gallons of water a day and just urinate it all out. And you'll think you're hydrated because it's clear, but your body can't hold on to it. You are never hydrated. You can only rehydrate when you lose. So if you don't like adding salt, if you think of table salt as an unhealthy supplement, that's fine. Then have soup or sushi with soy sauce or chili, something that's high in sodium on that day so that you're getting something you enjoy that's high in salt on a day when you need it, as opposed to on a rest day where you do not. So you can manipulate the foods that you like so that it doesn't feel like a supplement. Instead, you feel like you're treating yourself because you worked out hard with some kind of carby high salt thing. Any questions on the talk part? Because we're going to switch now to rolling up our sleeves and figuring, yes.
Do you have any comments and thoughts on caffeine?
Caffeine increases adrenaline release, which then triggers fat release from fat cells. It increases calcium release within muscle, so it increases the rate of force production. And it's also a weak diuretic, so over 200 milligrams, it's dehydrating, regardless of how much you drink. It's like opening a spigot. So there's plenty of research showing the downside from the dehydration effect, because then you just chase after your hydration if the spigot stays open. So that's the downside. But there's an upside in the 100, 150 milligram range. Do I only have 10 minutes left? Okay, so let's take a look at the worksheet. And maybe somebody can bring up the worksheet on there. Okay.
Hey, Clyde, can I ask a question before we jump to the worksheet?
Sure. Is that Mark?
Yeah, this is Mark. Yeah. Hi,
I
Clyde.
recognize that squeaky voice. How you doing?
So the
Where are you?
cramping.
Turn the video on.
Yeah.
I want to see the mug.
Yeah. So cramping is something super interesting to me. And it's really interesting how you said that cramping can be because the salt
High salt.
is
Concentrated.
too concentrated.
Yes.
But is it also true that you'd cramp if it's too low or too high, or is it typically when it's too high, the concentration?
There are 6 known mechanisms of cramping, which I would go into in a longer talk. But hyponatremia, low sodium concentration, from drinking too much pure water without salt, does the opposite of cramping. You're not able to contract the muscle. So this is where athletes start collapsing and go to the ICU. 10% of marathoners that go to the intensive care unit, it's from drinking too much pure water without enough salt. And they'll end up draining out of a catheter for 3 days because of the body's response to that. So cramping does not occur from low salt concentration. It occurs from high salt concentration. But there's other mechanisms. Low fuel availability in muscle triggers the muscle to cramp. And low fuel in the nervous system can contribute to that. And past cramping increases the risk even if your salt and fuel levels aren't particularly way off. So you can get a couple mechanisms converging to generate a cramp, whereas 10 years earlier, when you didn't have as many mechanisms coming into play, like if you get calf cramps, for example, in the middle of the night, or glute cramps, because when we fall asleep, the body doesn't coordinate the muscles as much. So whatever muscle tends to cramping continuously will, wake you up. And that's obviously not from immediate fuel loss or from your salts being off. If that was the case, the cramp would have occurred while you were going to bed. It wouldn't be waking you up at 3 a.m. But once that happens, you're at higher risk during training. And being off on your salts or your fuel during training might generate a cramp, whereas 10 years earlier, when you weren't getting the night cramps, it would have never happened. You would have gotten through the training just fine. So the mechanisms converge on each other. So you have to get better with your nutrition over time, not just because of natural aging and a reduced healing rate, but because of convergent mechanisms. In this case, with cramping, that's particularly the case. But low sodium does the opposite. And it's much more medically dangerous to overdrink than underdrink. If you collapse from dehydration, you can probably get the help you need in the med tent. But if you collapse from overdrinking, you're going to be in an ambulance. The med tent probably won't be enough. Yeah. Long-term potentiation. So our nervous system learns in the brain, in the spinal cord, and at the neuromuscular junction. And the reason that deep tissue needling, deep tissue massage, intensive stretching will inhibit muscle is because of the disruption of the trigger points, which is the neuromuscular junction. So with repeated hard training, the signaling strength goes up to the point where it will send a signal even when you're not trying to contract the muscle. It's kind of a soft version of whiplash after a car accident or post-traumatic stress disorder within the central nervous system, but it's in the peripheral nervous system. And so learning is the process of increased neurotransmitter release and more receptors on the receiving end. And with hard training, that neuromuscular junction, the strength of the voice, the release of neurotransmitters, and the size of the ears, which is the number of receptors, both go up. So the shouting goes up and the hearing of the shouting goes up, right? That signal's strong. And now at 3 in the morning, you get a cramp because the mouth is so big and the ears are so big that sounds are coming out and they're being heard even when you're not sending a signal. And the only way to get out of that is called neuromuscular reeducation, which is the painful long-term process of intensive stretching, light exercise to reeducate the muscle to the relaxation cycle, deep tissue massage, and they all have different mechanisms that can reconverge on your neuromuscular system to retrain your muscles to relax. And you know, I've been victim to all kinds of cramps, including whiplash from a car accident 30 years ago. And some of this stuff will stay around for your whole life potentially. The key is to do enough neuromuscular education to have a great quality of life, great performance in spite of that. And my major mistake for me personally was not to think about deep tissue and stretching as much as my training for the first 20 years. It wasn't until I started to have problems that I'm like, oh, I guess I should stretch. I mean, my 7-year-old daughter, if I squeeze a little bit, her triceps are almost as tight as mine. And she's like, what are you doing, Daddy? I'm like, no, we need deep tissue. Let's get a jump on this. You're going to have deranged biomechanics. And like me, we got to work on this. She's like, no, our dog has tight neck muscles. He's only 3. You know, your muscles aren't supposed to hurt when you push on them. So start neuromuscular reeducating before you have issues. That's the time to, and I didn't know that. Right? The earlier you start, don't wait until you can barely walk or move your arm. Start before that. If you're training, you should put as much thought into a prevention and healing as you do your training. And I didn't do that until I was in my late 30s. And by that time, it became like where I have to do a half hour to an hour a day. I stretch at least 30 minutes a day. Otherwise, I get stiff leg and you know, a lot of deadlifting, so my erector spinae, and I'm stretching at 3 in the morning so that I can get another couple hours of sleep. If I had started that at 17, I would have never thought to, right? So my suggestion is to work on neuromuscular reeducation right from the beginning and get expert opinion on your biomechanics right in the beginning. Don't assume, well, I'm going to go get good coaching when I'm better. You're training your body with unoptimal biomechanics potentially, which will put your neuromuscular system into a groove that's hard to get out of when you finally get the pro feedback. I think the most important time for coaching is in the very beginning and also when you're getting to a high level. Also in between. But if you're just going to like pick 2 times, I wouldn't just say, oh, it's when I'm good and then even better. I would say it's when you start. Anyway. And thank you for the question, Mark. So more questions. No? Okay.
Oh, I have a question, Dr. Wilson.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah. First, or it's two questions actually. First, of the different types of supplements out there, I noticed there's a lot of like vegan or vegetarian options versus just like the classic way. Do you think that something like pea or rice protein is better, worse, or the same for a protein supplement?
First off, number one, I have two answers. Number one, supplements are oxidized and therefore accelerate aging and increase the cancer risk, even if the research isn't out yet. There's enough evidence, even on just overcooking food, let alone cooking it to where it's a powder, that we know that they are at least weak carcinogens, even if we haven't studied every single powder and every single food yet. That, in my view, is clear. We don't need to wait 10 years until we show it's true with whey, and then another 10 years before we show it's true with pea protein. Powders are not food. Imagine the next time you look at peas on your plate or rice, how much heat it would take to make that a powder. Right? So it's oxidized. So you minimize its use to where you can't handle food. You just use it where you have to use that because you can't use food, as opposed to, I'm lazy, let's use a powder. Okay, so that's my first answer, is that all powders are horrible, but that they have utility in narrow windows of time where they can be important for that period of time. And so it's a cost benefit analysis. Yes, I'm going to use it here, and I'm not going to replace meals with this, right? That's the first thing. Then the answer that you're actually looking for, that you were hoping to get by asking it, is that the amino acid ratio for rice is 50% off what your body needs. So you'd have to have twice as much of the toxic powder. So you want the highest quality protein with the best amino acid ratio possible so that you minimize how much powder you're consuming. Because if you have to consume twice as much to get enough efficient protein, you're getting twice the oxidation. So when you go with pea protein, which is 2/3 efficient, you only have to have 50% more than if you had used the whey protein powder. So the advantage of the whey isn't that it's less toxic, it's that you're consuming less of it because it comes from an animal which has muscle also, and therefore the amino acid ratio is more closely matched. But pea protein isn't too far off from that. And there are some lentil species that are almost as high quality as steak and eggs. You do some internet searching, you'll find the quality score for some lentils are extremely high, as if they were animal foods. And then you only need the 1 tablespoon to get 15 grams of protein. And that's going to do the vast majority of the benefit right after your workout. Like if by your kilogram body weight and you're calculating 0.3 grams of protein powder per kilogram body weight and you need 20 grams, 15 does almost as good as the 20. So a level tablespoon of a quality protein is enough. A heaping tablespoon of like a pea protein that's not quite as high quality is enough. You don't need 3 tablespoons. You need much less than you think. And that gets the job done for 30 to 60 minutes, at which point food comes in.
Yeah.
You have a follow-up question? Because that's my answer.
No, I had a slightly different question. This is about the fat burning. And let me know if you should cut me off because
Probably move on to the worksheet, so maybe we can answer questions later.
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, we'll come back. So on the handout, I have a preamble here about sports injury and overtraining, oftentimes being caused by underhealing, of which a major component is underfueling. And I suggest a 4-step process to create your program. The first step is to think about how evenly your calories flow. Now, wherever in your day you eat the least, which is for most people the first third of their day, that's where you're going to start trying to protect lean tissue with concentrated protein sources and like a piece of fruit, which is a concentrated carbohydrate source. You're not going to start eating salads when you're used to eating nothing, right? So you go with concentrated sources, but they're still healthy. They're still minimally processed foods. It's not like it's a raw egg, right? So you're still processing it because it's a hard-boiled egg. So that's what I mean by minimally processed. You're not creating carcinogens. You're not eating powders. It's still food. It's just that you cooked it a little bit, or it's olive oil. It got squeezed out of an olive. There's some minimal, quote unquote, processing. So you're using minimally processed foods. and they're concentrated, but they're still foods that are relatively high in the carbohydrate and the protein, but they digest slow enough that you don't have the anti-eating effect, where it would have been better if you'd eaten nothing at all, right? So you're choosing foods that actually benefit you. So it isn't obviously all about calories, but we do want to have a sense for people who care about calories, what is the minimum target that you should go below which you're in the starved state because you're pushing it too low? And the answer is 25% below your daily needs. But figuring out daily needs is not trivial because it changes so much. And even the equations that give us a number were from some set of people that didn't include you, right? So we're back to the Micah G, micrometer, chalk, axe, gnaw on it, right? We're back to that. But I can't just say, throw up your hands and do whatever. I have to give you an equation, otherwise you're not happy. So here it is. Here's the micrometer that's wrong. It's a Mifflin-St. Jean equation. And I start by asking you your weight in kilograms, because most people don't know that. You usually think in pounds. Your height in meters. Most people don't know that. So you get those numbers, plug and chug. You get a Mifflin-St. Jean estimate in calories per day, capital C, which is kilocalories. And I didn't put in a fitness correction factor because a lot of very fit athletes, when they're training their hardest, resting metabolic rate drops because of the nutrient deficit from the harder workouts. So when you increase your training volume or intensity for the first month or two until the body readjusts to that, by which time you've probably reduced the training because you did this for a competition, right? Your resting metabolic rate actually drops because of the harder training. It is not true that harder training raises resting metabolic rate. That is not true. Only after your body adapts to the harder training, which takes time, does resting metabolic rate go up. So just to say, well, I'm fitter, I have a higher resting metabolic rate, it might actually be lower because you're training harder at that time. So it's better just to ignore a fitness adjustment to the calculation when it actually might be lower than if you weren't training at all because of how hard the training is. Does that make sense? That's why you don't see a fitness correction factor. And if you're over 40, as I am, I'm 52, take off 1% of the number for each year of aging. So I would take off 12%. And you'll see that again later. To digest foods, you're going to increase your needs by 25%. So you take your Mifflin-St. Jean equation, which is resting metabolic rate, where you're digesting nothing and you're not moving at all, right? Just resting in a dark room, chilling out, and then they do the measurement 15 minutes later. But now you're going to eat food and it takes calories to digest the calories. So that's a 25% increase, including posture. So posture, standing for a few minutes here and there, digesting food, it's 25% higher than your Mifflin-St. Jean. And we're not going to fit correct. And if you're healing from hard workouts, you're going to need at least another 25%, which gives us a total 50% higher than the Mifflin-St. Jean estimate of your resting metabolic rate. So 1.5 times this first number crunching gives you a rough approximation of the minimum calorie count without moving, without workouts, below which you're too much in the start state. So this gives us a lower threshold. Step number 2, where you have the least number of calories coming in compared to your needs, like you don't like breakfast, for example, that's where we want to start thinking about protecting lean tissue, getting a concentrated, whole food, natural protein and carbohydrate source. And always water. You always need water to transport nutrients. Might as well not eat if you don't have water to transport. So water, protein, and healthy carbs, meaning without an anti-eating effect, are the 3 things that protect lean tissue. You need a liter per quart of water for 8,000 calories you eat. At least half of that is pure water, not anything added or bubbly. Bubbly has problems. Low acidity water has problems. Low calorie sweetener has problems. Tea is a weak diuretic. Coffee is a weak diuretic. Alcohol is problematic. At least half of all fluids have got to be pure water without bubbles, without basicity added, without anything added, water. If you don't like water, you can chase it with whatever you're into. You drink water first, just like you have a salad before your cake, you have water before your tea, before your coffee, before anything. Water first. If you can't parent yourself enough to do that, then I don't know how to help you. This is a self-parenting issue. It doesn't matter that you don't like water. Your body needs water. And it doesn't matter that you don't want to eat when you wake up. Your body's eating itself. there are some things that are not based on your opinion, your feelings, or your perception of need. They're just independent of that. And it's good to know what those are so that you don't get confused about everything as if everything is rules. It's not all rules, but there are a few rules that we need to think about, and water is one of them. Okay, protein. Without training, you need at least 0.6, as much as 0.8 grams per kilogram. 0.6 is the average need. 0.8 captures 2 standard deviations above that. Probably most of you have heard that you need 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. That's 2 standard deviations above the average. The average need is 0.6. That's why I put 0.6. But you might need another 0.6 for hard training and another 0.6 beyond that for very hard training, which starts creeping up towards 2 grams per kilogram. That's like a gram per pound. So if you've heard arguments over a gram per kilogram, a gram per pound, no, you're right, no, you're both right. So we can delete that argument too. Just love deleting arguments. Let's get rid of it. Oh, it's gone. Woo. So you multiply that by your kilogram body weight. If you feel like your body fat is a little higher or a little lower than what was probably used for average weight active individuals, then you can adjust your weight slightly to accommodate for that, to figure out how much protein you need, if that makes sense, right? So instead of 55 kilograms, you can say, well, I'm going to call it 50 kilograms. Or if you're a little leaner than probably your typical healthy athlete, you know, maybe for 2 months of the year, then you're like, okay, the metabolic rate protein needs going to be a little higher, so I'm going to add 5 kilograms to the weight for these numbers, for the number. And then I've got the protein chart on there, grams per how much of the concentrated protein sources. For carbs, 60 grams for your brain, unless you're in ketosis, so that you're inducing bone loss, which I don't support and is therefore not part of the worksheet. If you want to do ketosis, you need to talk to me about that as a separate issue. It's not interesting enough to all athletes to go into 10 minutes on ketosis, right? If you want to do athletic ketosis, you can do it, but that's, you know, you have to do a little bit more of the micrometer stuff. And so 60 grams for the brain, and then match how much carb you're eating to the protein that's driving your healing. Do a 1-to-1 ratio between the two. That gives you your total grams per day of carbohydrate. So you take your protein daily target, your carbohydrate daily target, you divide by 20 to get how much you need per hour. Why not 24? Because you're not eating dinner so big that it lasts you 12 hours till breakfast. You will inevitably lose a little bit of lean tissue the second half of the night while you're sleeping. You should not be eating so much at dinner that you're trying to go 12 hours. So by dividing by 20 hours, that's acknowledging that your meals aren't trying to push all the way through the night. You're only trying to nutrify your body for 20 hours. So calculating how much protein and carb that you're going to eat in a meal is based on how much studies say that you need in the day. And the most that you can benefit from your meals is accommodating your body for 20 hours, unless you're going to eat at night, which destroys the second half of your sleep, and you don't want that. Sleep is more important than nutrition. So as soon as nutrition deranges sleep, you need to back off. So let the nutrition work for you for 20 hours, and you let your body eat itself a little bit for 4, and then when you wake up, you fix it, right? Because you're transitioning to starve, so you fix it. So now you've got an hourly target, which you multiply by the number of hours between feeding. So if you're going to go 6 hours from breakfast to lunch, you multiply your hourly protein carb target by 6 hours, and that tells you how much you have to eat to get to lunch. That assumes that you're choosing foods that digest slow enough that they don't have an anti-eating effect, so that it actually helps you get to lunch. Because a bagel with cream cheese, you'd need 650 calories of cream cheese just to get 50 calories of protein. That is not a protein, just because it's kind of chewy and feels like meat in your mouth. That does not make it a protein. And the bagel digests so fast that it's an anti-eating effect. So bagels covered in cream cheese is nothing, except for a loss in your body and an increased body fat, putting you to sleep already at 10 o'clock and hungrier so that you can barely think at 11. So when I'm talking about eating, I'm talking about food that actually helps you, as opposed to food that cripples your ability to get through your morning. I once had an athlete say, you know what, I don't eat breakfast because my breakfast makes me hungrier. What are you eating? Lucky Charms, Fruit Loops. That was the answer. I'm not kidding. This isn't a joke. This is like real world consultation. Fruit Loops and Lucky Charms. But that's anti-eating. They're like, what's that? They've heard of antimatter, but anyway. So the chart at the bottom of the first page, you put how many hours between waking and breakfast, between breakfast and lunch, and between lunch and dinner and sleep. It's that number of hours that you multiply by your hourly target. So if you wait 3 hours to eat breakfast, then you have a snack that just gets you through at least 2 hours of that. And we're going to call that a PLT snack, protect lean tissue. And it's probably just grabbing something and throwing it in your mouth. It's not going to be very big. So you have a PLT snack. After your workout, you refuel and do breakfast. And if there's not much time between breakfast and lunch, the breakfast might be almost as small as the PLT. So you might do a PLT, workout, refuel, another PLT, and then 2 meals. And under eating overall by 25%, under refueling by 25%, getting leaner and feeling great. Turn the page over. How much to refuel? So there's a few steps here. First, you have to estimate how many calories you're burning in your workout. Second, you have to estimate how many of those calories are sugar loss. And then from there, estimate how much of that sugar loss you want to refuel. It's 3 steps. So the first step to estimating how many calories you're losing, I'm using this top simple equation, your kilogram lean weight, so your athletic weight, so not underweight or overweight, so you might have to adjust whatever your number is, times your fitness level. And the fitness level, I tweaked to take into account metabolic equivalents and other aspects from the literature in my homework assignments in my sports nutrition class. It's a lot more material pages. I had to get this into one line, right? So I simplified what was already simplified into kilogram athletic weight times fitness level. And that forced me to define fitness level in a weird kind of way, which I'm going to describe. So if you're like, where did he get that? It came from simplifying other algorithms, 3 or 4 of them into one. If you assign your fitness level from a range of 5 to 15, where 5 is sedentary, 10 is exercising, and 15 is your peak fitness as a competitive athlete, then that 5 to 15 range, you can just multiply by kilogram body weight, and it gets you within 20–30% of an actual calorie count of the maximum you can do in an hour, which isn't too bad considering how simplified this is, right? So we're just going to go with that. So it's wrong, but it's good enough. So that gives you a maximum calories per hour. And the next blanks you'll see, there's an L, M, H, and V. L, M, H, V. That's for low, medium, high, very high intensity. So those are workouts that you could maintain up to an hour, up to 2 hours, up to 4 hours, or over 4 hours. Now you might go jogging for an hour or cycling for an hour at an intensity that you could do for longer than that, right? So we're going to call the intensity of that workout how long you could do the workout, not how long you actually do it, but how long you could. Does that make sense? The intensity of a workout, we're defining by how long you could do the workout, not how long you could actually. So this calories per hour that you just calculated, based on your kilogram body weight, your fitness level in a range of 5 to 15, is your very high. That's the most you can burn in an hour. Now for you, it might be less, it might be more. But if you have no idea, you just go with it. Just go with the number. We're going to mark it in chalk and put it with an axe and gnaw on it anyway. So who cares? It's fine that it's wrong. The gnawing will fix it. Then you make a linear progression. So you got your number, and that's the very high. That's the V. And a quarter of that would be low. Half of that would be medium. 3/4 would be high. Now, in reality, the calorie burn rate is not linear. But it depends on whether you're more fit with your lactate threshold or VO2 max, how it's not linear. So we're just going to call it linear because yours might curve down or it might curve up depending on what you're most fit in. So linear works. It's good enough. You're going to gnaw it on anyway. So it doesn't matter. So that gives us calories per hour at the different intensities. Most workouts have different intensities within it. There's a warm up, there's a cool down. You might have an hour of this intensity, then there's an uphill, so it's higher intensity, right? It changes. So your workout is going to be a combination of these. It might be a half hour of one of these and 15 minutes of another one, and you just have to kind of do a back of the envelope in your head and like, oh, that's probably 500 calories or something like that, right? That's how you do it. That gives you a very rough approximation of a calorie for a workout. So I put on the chart here for 4 workouts. So call them whatever you want. You could do plyometric cross training. There might be recovery ride. There might be hilly ride. There might be long ride on Sunday, right? Whatever you call them, however you think of them. You write them down. And then the next row underneath the name is how many calories you might be burning based on these numbers up here. And each workout is some combination of them, right? It's rare that you're going to have just low intensity or just very high, right? It's some mix. The third row is the percentage of those calories that might be fat burning. And that's the thin chart right up here. If it's a steady pace, going longer than 10 minutes, particularly longer than an hour, you're going to be at lactate threshold or below. That's maybe half as glucose use and half as fat use. If you're doing a steady pace that's 10 minutes or less, then you're close to your VO2 max. That's going to be about 2/3 sugar use, 1/3 fat use. If you're doing bursts that are more like 3 minutes long, it's going to be closer to 80% sugar use, only 20% fat use. And if you're doing bursts that are a minute or less, now it's almost all sugar use, almost no fat use at all. So if you did a 1-minute sprint every hour for 12 hours, it would be low intensity workout because you're going 12 hours. But it would be high intensity bursts. So you'd be burning almost no calories and it would be all sugar. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you can have very intense bursts, but there's so much rest that the workout's low intensity. The workout intensity is based on how long you can go. It's the intensity of your peaks that determines how much is sugar. So the calories is based on how long you can go. How much of that is sugar versus fat is based on the intensity variation. You have to separate that out in your mind. Otherwise, this will be confusing and you'll never figure it out. Workout intensity is not the same thing as peak intensity within the workout. It's the overall how long you can go, that's your calories. And that doesn't tell you how much sugar loss. It's the variation in intensity that tells you how much sugar loss. So this will give you a percentage that is likely to be glucose loss. You take the percentage of that overall calorie use, and that gives you a glucose loss estimate. That's how much sugar your muscle burned and your neurons burned in that workout. You want to replace at least 75% so that you're not in a 25% deficit in your glycogen. If that 75% is only 100 calories, you can let the whole thing go. If it's 200 calories, replace at least half of it. More than that, stick to the 75% number. Don't risk underhealing just because you want to increase your fat burning. You can skip the refuel on something short with a lower intensity unless you just woke up and went straight to it because you're doubling up how deep in the ditch you are because you haven't eaten since dinner, right? That's kind of the outline. So think about what starch you might want to use. After harder workouts, you want to use more processed stuff because it gets in faster in that 10 minutes. Bagels, muffins, cornflakes. For medium hard workouts, start going with healthier stuff like granola, yams. You know, it's okay that it digests a little slower because their absorption rate in the muscle isn't as high. It wasn't as intensive work. And then in meals, you need to go with whole grain stuff and add vegetables to slow it down. Because at that point, you want the carbs to come in as slow as the protein so that it's driving protein production instead of driving fat production. Step 3. Oh, last point. I mentioned this earlier. If the amount of refueling exceeds 1 gram of carbs per kilogram body weight, then you have to have some refueling in your next meal because you can't absorb more than 1 gram, maybe 1.5 grams of carbohydrate in that first 10, 20 minutes. Muscle can't absorb it. You might have a long, intense workout where you lose 1,000 calories of carbohydrate. You still can't get more than 300, maybe 400, depending on how much lean tissue you have, into your muscle. You might still have to do 400 or 500 calories more refueling. You can't do that in that 10 minutes. So you're going to have to put refuel into your next meal. And maybe you'll go up a little bit in body fat, but the healing will be more than worth it. But if you have to do more than the next meal, put carbs into the workout. Don't keep refueling more than that 10 minutes plus the next meal. Have a banana before the workout. Put maltodextrin into the workout or quarter peanut butter sandwiches or whatever. Get it done so that you reduce the refuel load after. Get the refuel going early. Think of the calories during the workout as refueling the workout before the workout's over. Last piece, nourish your body. That's where the quality fats and the vegetables come in. And for your lunch and dinner, you want to put in those components, the unsaturated fats, omega fats, and vegetables, particularly if you're still refueling in a meal to slow down its digestion. Because if you're just doing the carb and protein, then you're just protecting lean tissue and building it in the short term, but you're not nourishing your body enough to stay healthy in the long term. And long-term performance is driven by health. You can't just put protein, water, and carb in. If you don't have a meal that's nourishing your body, you're going to start falling apart within 6 months. So the harder you train, the more important it is to have 2 meals of nourishment, if possible. Questions on the handout? Please.
On that first question, you said one word,
Sex, male versus female. And I forgot to put in the number. So for females, it's -5. For males, it's +127. Females -5, males +127. And you can also look up this one's St. George calculator. There are dozens of websites where you just put your height and weight, even in pounds and feet, and it converts everything and gives you a number. Also, something you might want to write in the margins on the protein section, which is just below halfway point on the front page, that 10 to 15% of all food is protein. If you remember that, then you'll know with a larger meal, you might not have to add a bunch of protein. If you think you need 5 ounces of protein in your meals, if there's a salad, avocado, nuts, stuff that aren't actually really a concentrated protein source, there's 10 to 15% protein that builds muscle. There's as much as 30% protein, but the efficiency might be. But 10 to 15% for 500 calories is 50 calories of protein. You only need 2 ounces of chicken breast or 3 ounces of protein. Only half what you thought, because the rest of the food has some. Just because it's low doesn't mean it's zero, right? Your larger meals have enough protein. If you're not training, you don't ever have to add tofu or eggs or milk at all. A sedentary person who's eating 1,200 to 600 calories a day doesn't need to add any protein at all. It's the training that forces you to do that, unless you want to double your calories.
Oh, yeah.
Which an athlete who wants to be lean doesn't want to throw. More questions?
I'm going to start pulling up his talk for next. So let's answer questions for a few more minutes, and then I'll get Ted's talk loaded up here.
And Dr. Wilson, I had another question about the fat for fuel.
You could hold on, Noah. We were just answering one more question.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear.
Got a question? Sure. The question was, what do you recommend eating before and after? If you haven't had a meal in over, depending on how big a meal, like 600 calories of balanced food, you can do a workout 5 hours later and you're fine. Half that size, 2-3 hours later, you might already want to have a snack. You have to think about how much you ate, how many hours ago to determine whether you have to eat anything before the workout or not. The higher the power that you need in the workout to adapt to high power, the more you want to think about having an apple or a banana so that your blood sugar stays strong, so that you get the most out of that workout. The more the workout is even intensity, where you want to maximize fat burning, the lower you want your blood sugar to be. So then you want to intentionally not eat and let yourself be hungry and just go for an hour, so that you trigger an adaptation to fat burning as if it was way higher intensity workout. When you coordinate your nutrition to fuel the higher intensity and to underfuel the lower intensity, you get more of a high intensity adaptation and a low intensity fat burning adaptation to leverage the workout itself, right? So you can get an adaptation out of a recovery run by tricking the body into high underfueling. Anyway, so the answer is a little more complicated than you were probably hoping. And then after, you go with complete garbage, processed carbohydrate, with some protein. Water first. Water's the priority. Then comes the refuel with protein. The protein is going to be the same for all your workouts. The carbohydrate will range anywhere from 0 to, if you have breakfast and then do a recovery ride, don't refuel. You have no breakfast and a recovery ride, then you need to refuel because you're doubling up on your need. That makes sense. So the carb fluctuates a lot. The protein and the water, less so. And then your next meal, could be a PLT snack or double that size that people think of as breakfast. You want to start adding vegetables already at breakfast, as I do. I want to nourish my body 3-4 times a day, so I think of breakfast as an opportunity to nourish. Then all of a sudden, I've got 2 cups of vegetables on the plate too, and I'm eating beans every morning because it takes so long to digest. So it's like a triple IV flow. Beans are an amazing trick for being a lean, healthy athlete because it takes 8 hours to digest beans, and you know that because some of it is digested by bacteria that makes gas. So the gas is a direct indication of how amazing it is. And I'm sure your friends think the same thing. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for. That's how my brain processes the answer. So do you have a follow-up to that so I can help you more?
Makes sense. What's just like breakfast? What
For a power workout, have a banana. For a light workout, a lower intensity, have an apple. If you want it to be oats, go with a quick cook steel cut because that's soft enough that you don't even have to cook it. So that'll artificially slow down the digestion rate. You add water, it's kind of like eating chunks of peanuts. It has the same consistency. Totally doable, not weird at all. You'll be used to it immediately. In my case, I like to add hemp seeds as the omega fat to the uncooked quick cook steel. So the oats that take an hour to cook are too hard to do that. But the quick cook steel cut oats are soft enough. And depending on how hard my workout is, I'll do a 1-to-1 ratio of hemp seeds to uncooked quick cook steel cut oats because they have the same consistency. It doubles the volume. I'm getting healthy fats in at the same time. And if it's a harder workout, then I'll reduce the ratio. I'll have less hemp seeds and more of the steel cut oats. But when you get past 100, 150 calories of the steel cut oats, you're overloading what the muscle can absorb even in the 2 hours that it takes to digest it. Unless the workout's really long and really intense, then you could double that. You could go potentially to 300 calories of uncooked steel cut oats, which would be 1/2 cup dry measure. And as it absorbs water, it might go to a whole cup.
So you're just soaking it in water. You're not actually.
It's soaking in my stomach. I don't wait.
You don't wait. Oh, wow.
You could wait if you want.
Okay, so dry.
Try it. With the quick cook, it works. You could use chia seeds too, hemp seeds, chia seeds. More questions? There was a question that
No, I
was
have one
waiting.
more.
Oh, okay.
No, are you still there?
Yeah. So kind of going back to this idea of using fat for fuel, I heard of this idea of like fat loading before a marathon maybe, and you for like 10 days you eat kind of low carb, high fat. I guess what are your opinions on using that to help with like fatty fuel utilization?
Now, I'm a big supporter of
adaptation.
nourishment, and fats is a major component of that. Vegetables and quality fats are the central concepts of nourishment. So I support that idea. There's a problem in that when a person says high fat, they're generally referring to low carb. It isn't just high fat, it's also low carb at the same time. So it's when you say high fat, it doesn't just mean you're eating a lot of calories of fats, it also means that a high percentage of your total calories is fats, correct?
Yeah.
Right, therein lies the problem. It's not the high fat consumption that's a problem, it's the elimination of the carbs that's the problem, which then circles us back to the first few slides of the talk, that you're don't have a strong enough blood sugar to drive protein production and therefore undercut healing. So I would need a follow-up question from you on what to say beyond what was in the talk so that I could adjust what I'm saying to help you with this.
Oh, just are there gender differences in fat utilization as well as like fat use adaptations?
The answer is no. The answer is no. Marcia Stefanik is the leader in this field of research. And she used to lecture in my nutrition exercise class at Stanford. And when she started speaking, in my classes in 2002, she said there was a difference, that our physiological difference, that lactation, pregnancy is basically trying to run 5 marathons at a time for months on end. And that women therefore have a greater physiological, theoretical potential of fat burning, which is why women are better at ultra endurance. And the data no longer supports that. As the data has accumulated and become refined, we're seeing that the difference is much less than we had thought, that the differences are greater between individuals than they are between male versus female, and greater from the type of training in your genetics than between male versus female. The way to increase fat use is to keep insulin levels low in your meals and how you eat before your training. And it's fine to do that with high fat, low carb, as long as you refuel enough that the low blood sugar doesn't inhibit your healing. So I fully support low carb eating as long as you refuel so that the body can handle it. So you could have 80% of your calories as fats, 10 to 15% protein, 5% as carb, with a lot of fiber that doesn't count because it never gets to the bloodstream. So tons of vegetables, lots of spinach. Well, that has oxalic acid and causes kidney stones. So maybe not lots of spinach. Everything comes with a downside. So mix it up. That way you have low-level toxins, none of which is your bottleneck, right? I mean, fish has mercury. I mean, there's nothing you can get away from. I mean, tofu is partly oxidized, so the isoflavones, I mean, you cannot get away from toxicity, which is why you want a varied diet. So let's say your digestible carb calories that actually gets to the bloodstream is really low, your body has an amazing tolerance of that as long as you refuel. If you don't refuel, your blood sugar will be even too low for what your body's okay with ketosis. Looks like I'm done.
Yeah, sorry, we're running late.
Did that help?
Definitely. Thank you so much. Sorry for taking the time.
You're welcome. Okay, so my mom's in town and my 7-year-old's waiting for me, and so I have to leave. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
How do you do that? There you go.
Thanks, Dr. Clyde.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate your time. Thanks.